Where are you adding value? And when it comes to communication, how are you communicating to your stakeholders in a personal life, people that you love and care about, to your family, to your friends, to associates in business that you care about, all those things? How are you communicating to them on where we're adding value?
Welcome to Speaking Human with Dr. Damini. Speaking Human is a storytelling podcast where each episode traces how voices rooted in Asia and connected to Asia learn to communicate, from childhood dynamics through key turning points to the way they use their voice today. The goal is to explore how communication shapes who we are and to make honesty, vulnerability, and courage culturally aspirational. The Speaking Human platform is founded on a simple belief: clarity in voice, courage in connection, humanity in every conversation. This isn't a show about public speaking tips. It's about the messy, vulnerable, and funny ways we learn to speak to ourselves, to others, and to the world. In the studio with me today is Derek. Derek Harris is the head of innovation education at Innoventiem, where he focuses on creativity, adaptability, and mindset in a rapidly changing world. Alongside his work in innovation, he is an internationally exhibited Canadian-Australian artist whose energetic, conceptual art explores human connection, meaning, and personal growth. Derek, I'm sure there's a lot of publicly available information about all the wonderful things that you do and all of your achievements. Today, I'm hoping that we're going to go a little bit beyond that into who you are as a person, that human being behind all the weird and wonderful things that you get up to.
Absolutely. Happy to do it. Looking forward to the whole experience.
Awesome. So let's start at the very beginning,
Okay.
right? This is how I usually do it. So we're going to start with, who was Derek as a child, right? Where
Sure.
were you born? Tell me about your family, your dynamics, culturally, and let's sort of anchor that to the way
Sure.
that you first learned to use your voice as a child.
Sure. Oh, yeah, easy. So I was born in Toronto, Canada. So my parents were first generation immigrants.
From?
Mom and dad came from Germany at the time. So mom is Czechoslovakian, German mix. There may be some Jewish, don't know, right? Dad is French and Scottish, and he's got some Middle Eastern blood as well in him. You know, we're a mix. We're a hybrid. I guess in Canada we'd say a mutt. Like, you know, we did that. So they moved to Canada. I was born. Then what happened was I had to actually live with my grandparents. I went back to Germany to live with my grandparents when I was a couple years old, just because circumstances needed to balance. Mom and dad were trying to, I guess, make things meet in this dynamic, crazy time in Canada. So I ended up living with my grandparents for about 6 months.
Okay.
And it was interesting because these were my formative years. So when I came back to live with my parents, I spoke German. And everyone else is speaking English.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's that but I'm like wired just that little bit differently because I had to learn English all over again. Going to class, you know, in school, I would speak English, but like if you spoke German to me right now, I don't have to translate any of that language, right? So what does that mean? It means that, I guess, culturally, there's this mix. And that's probably been something that's allowed me to work throughout my whole life in different places. So I've worked in Canada, in Australia, all parts of Australia, Southeast Asia, and that ability to switch is there. But you need to be able to let go of some of the things of the past to be able to move forward into the future. So you were asking about my childhood, right? So mixed people, mixed cultures, you know, you're where some people are looking for stability. The stability was just going with things, you know, which at the time you kind of say, how do you fit normally into things? Whereas you learn, and now I guess retrospectively, you fit in by just fitting in. There's no box for you to go into. But when I was a kid, like mom did cute things. Like she came from a quite established family, and so everyone was prim and proper.
Yeah.
So when I went to school, she got me. Just a funny story. And she still kind of goes, "I can't believe I did that." She got me to wear lederhosen.
Oh, nice.
Right? Which
nice.
is great.
Yeah.
Super idea.
Yeah, yeah.
Except that in Canada, you go, what? What's
Social
going on?
suicide.
So it's like, what's wrong with that kid? And of course, I'm like, I don't know the rules. I just went, mom put me into this. Okay, it's a clown suit, I guess, whatever. But you roll with it. But here's the funny thing. It kind of gives you resilience. So, okay, that happened once, but it's not because mom planned it that way. It was just the circumstances. And at the time you go, oh, this is a bit up and down, but we dealt with it, right?
Yeah. Okay. So, language is one part of how we communicate.
Yes.
Right. Identity is another part. So
sure.
Things like this, where you're building resilience through experiences in a different culture. And like you said, it wasn't intentional. She didn't do it to sort of put you in the funny seat or whatever.
Yeah.
She just was doing what she knew how to do, right? Which is dress you nice.
Yeah.
There's a whole other aspect of how we learn to communicate, right?
Sure.
Which is, do you have an opinion? Do you have a right to voice?
Yeah.
Right? So, okay, you didn't know any different when you were being put in a lederhosen, but if you had not wanted to wear that, did you have a right to an opinion to say, I don't feel comfortable in this? Or because there are different ways of parenting across different cultures where that may or may not be even an option for you to speak up.
Yeah. Well, look, I came from a very strict and disciplined family.
Mm-hmm.
So as a child, there's a spot in the hierarchy where you're a child, right? And you speak when you're spoken to, and the real rules are in place. That's kind of how I grew up.
Yeah.
Like, dad was boss number one, mom was boss number two. I was there, yes, sir, no, sir. Yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. And some people might go, yeah, but that's not the right way to go. I have to tell you, I think it's the best way to go. And the reason why it's the best way to go is because it gets you to understand sometimes what the hierarchies are. And it's been very valuable for me in my professional career to be able to see what those hierarchies are.
Yep.
And also know when to say something and when not to say something. If you're raised along the lines, and I don't know the answer, so, please, Derek doesn't know. He's just talking about what he's talking about, okay? So, because I don't want someone to go, you're that person that totally wrong. I probably am totally wrong.
Well, that's the whole point of having this platform, right?
Yeah.
To be able to say what your opinion is, and people don't have to agree with it.
Yeah,
it's just one perspective. So
and
don't apologize.
Oh, no,
just
but
go on.
Everything has 100 different perspectives.
Yeah,
and so for me, and what works for me is understanding that. So I remember a time when I was listless and carefree, and then dad said to me in his own special way, listen, you must follow my rules. If you don't, there will be disciplinary action, right? And I ignored him, and he showed me disciplinary action. And then I went, I get it. Okay. And to this day, I'm unfortunately passed away 20 years ago, but to this day, if dad walked into the room, yes, sir, no, sir, how do we do it, right? But that's cool because that works in that environment. And what you learn is, or what I learned is, different environments, you shift into different hierarchies.
So how did you learn which environments require that shift, right? How do you not automatically then defer your decision-making every time to the person who's above you? Because there's always someone above you at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think through life and experience, you just get smarter and you process faster, and you go, if I don't do this, if I'm like yes or no sir under every circumstance, then that can't be exactly right either, because then what's going to happen is I'm not shifting, I'm not adapting. Now, maybe that's why I teach adaptability, because you need to be able to assess your environments and then go, how do I get from where I am to where I need to be? And in some environments, being subordinate and listening very attentively is a good move. It's a smart move, right? In other environments, when you do that too much, you can see that you're not going to progress and grow. So you need to, we all have so much information available to us, but the big question is, when do you learn to switch? And there's no green light that's going to come up in life and go, now is the time that you need to change, right?
So if you had to give someone advice on, like, I don't know, the 3 things that they should be looking for that'll, give them that green light or that sort of signal to say, okay, these are situations in which I should be switching, what would those be?
So I think the first piece of advice, again, I don't know. I keep saying
Go
that.
on, Derek. Give us the advice. We're asking for it here.
So feel comfortable in experimenting, because one of the big things about rules is that in this life, there are no rules. There's guidelines. Like that Pirates of the Caribbean scene where, these 2 pirates are talking and then the guy says, what are the rules? You follow the rules and then the other guy breaks the rules and he goes, yeah, but those are guidelines.
Yeah.
We need some reference. Otherwise we get too weird. So back to this, the guideline I would say is, if you're in a particular situation and you go, oh, why did I do that again? Right? Or, oh, this thing keeps popping up. I should have said this. Or I needed to do that. Or, oh gosh, there's a better way of doing it. If that comes up a couple of times, that's a nice flag, not the direction, right?
Yeah.
And you might go, well, what could I try differently? So this is, in my innovation background, you got a theory, but you don't know. So you got to experiment. So that's when you test it out. So in your personal relationships or in your business relationships, try something, right?
Yeah.
And then test it. And then if you go, okay, that worked, fine. If you went, oh, it's still not right, great. Then you try a little bit something else. And try it a couple of times, okay? Like imagine that you're this mad scientist. You've got to find the answer to it, but the truth is not over here or there or in the books. It's somewhere in between. And you need to have those fine-tuned tools to find those things, right? And everybody's different. That's the amazing thing about people, right? So you and I might be in the same situation and we want to end up in a better spot. And we might approach things experimenting the same way. You might find that your approach didn't work as well as mine. So then you would try something different to get to that same point, right? That same success point.
And I guess all of those sort of trial and error things, anchoring actually a little bit to the book, is at the end of the day, we each have a different context. So actually you and I could do the exact same approach and end up with different results. So it's really about experimenting with what works for you specifically, or for each individual. So people who are watching this, for them to recognize, this is my background, this is my context, and this is what, I was just having this conversation last night with some friends that 2025, we were sort of reflecting on 2025 and what was your sort of biggest takeaway from the year? And I think one of my biggest takeaways was that I've been really, really lucky to have incredible mentors in 2025. But actually, when I reflect on some of the advice that they gave me, some of the ways that they've done things and achieved what I do see as aspirational in some ways, but then I look at their lives, I look at their relationships, I look at the fact that actually many of them never had children. I have 2 young kids. So there is a whole reality around what I can and cannot action, what will and won't work for me, what culturally feels authentic and comfortable to me versus not. And so I think for me, that learning in 2025, a big one, has been taking the advice, right? Being quiet in those rooms and hearing what people who are smarter than you, more successful than you, have learned and can share, but then taking all of that and being able to experiment in your own way what's going to work for you. So coming back to you then with this experimentation, right? Where do you feel like it got you in terms of the rooms or the doors that it unlocked as you went through and experimented with your own ability to use your voice and power in that session?
It's opened up everything. It's my life. Okay, so I remember this Harvard study is boring. So if I'm bantering,
Yeah.
cut it out. It's, cut it out of the
Yeah.
actual session. But it was basically a group of Harvard MBAs. It was about goal setting, where you write down your specific goals, right? And they had this class of, I'm making up the numbers, but let's say it's 35 people. And out of the 35 people, they said, write down your life goals specifically, and then what you want to accomplish. And the class said, yeah. But most people didn't write down the goals. But I think it was about 20% or 10%. Again, numbers are bad with me, but wrote them down. And they did a longitudinal study where they reviewed all these Harvard MBAs like 20, 30 years later. And this was the statistic I do remember. The 5% that specifically wrote down their goals specifically, right, details, ended up collecting almost 80% of the wealth. 80, and they achieved all of their goals, and they did all of those things. And so I went, okay, I've got to write my goals down, right? Which I did. And by the way, I did this experiment, and I wrote down, and I have this Excel spreadsheet where I write everything down from when I was in my 30s to I did this online survey to say I'm going to live to be 104. So every year I've got what do I want with my family, personal goals, financial goals. And surprisingly, what happened was I lost the spreadsheet. And then 10 years later, I found it. And when I was going through the spreadsheet, I'd accomplished almost 80% of the stuff. Now, not in exactly the way I wanted it, right? So what I'm saying is there's this value on setting up a plan. But how you get there is never the way it works.
You imagine.
Yeah. So like I want to be successful, right? I want to be influential in business. I didn't think it was going to be about innovation. I ran shopping centers and assets and property management stuff. And then I end up in innovation teaching at universities about how to think creatively. And if you talk to a university and say an innovation course with a creative focus, they'd go, thumbs down, man.
Yeah.
And yet when you apply it, all of a sudden this is, one of the most successful programs ever. So I can't plan it. You set up a plan and then you work towards it. But getting those specific steps never works. And that's why I go, you got to experiment, right? Because that will help you get there. And when it comes to communicating verbally or visually, when it comes to understanding who you are, I think the model, I don't know if it's the right model, but it works for me, is I got to experiment all the time and I mess up all the time, right? And then I went, that didn't work. And then, you kind of.
So when you mess up, right? Let's talk a little bit about that. I want to talk about the program as well.
we can definitely mess up.
Should we do another episode about that?
Messing up is.
I want to talk about messing up.
Yeah.
Okay. And how do you get comfortable with messing up?
Sure.
And also, the second part to that question is, what is your experience in Asia? Because I feel like Asians as a people collectively, and I say this as one, is we are quite risk averse. Not only are we risk averse, but we don't take failure very well.
Excellent question. And let me just throw in a couple of spanners to get you thinking here. So Asia, for example, is like saying North America or Central America. Like there are so many regions, or like China, for instance. There's 41, 42 cultures in China, right? So then when you talk about Chinese people, you go, are you talking Hakka? Are you talking Cantonese? Because once you get into closer view of that, they're all very, very different, right? So Asia, there's some, gosh, I'm trying to think. There's this great book, The Geography of Thought, which talks about how people from a European background see the world and how people from Asia see the world. And, and I love it because they did this again, another study. Sorry, it's boring, but where a sample of people were looking at an aquarium, and there was an Asian sample group and a European sample group, and when people were looking at the aquarium in from a European background, they were looking at the specific movements of the fish or what the different parts were doing, like very task and objective oriented. And when people from Asia were describing this aquarium, they were looking at the overall environment and how everything was in balance. And that is a little bit of the type of thought we need to go into when we're talking about other components of being Asian, European, Central American. It's all in that bit of a bundle. So back to your question on what did I learn? Or
risk, risk, failure.
Okay, so first, it doesn't matter what country you're from. Life is filled with risks, and in order to actually move forward, you got to try stuff, and you've got to pick yourself up when it doesn't work. Because, by the way, it never works. It never works the way you want, right?
Don't tell people that.
Yeah. But life doesn't stop. And here's the sad thing: nobody cares. Nobody cares if you pick yourself up or you don't. So pick yourself up, because life's going to keep going on and you got to keep going on. So that's maybe a universal thing. And then how we handle it, how we see it, how we frame it, then gets into our experience and our backgrounds and our cultural differences. Now, when people say Asians are risk averse, okay, but then why do Chinese people like to gamble so much?
Fair.
Right? Now, I'm just
maybe because we love money more than we hate risk.
I guess my point is this. It's not that we are a particular type of people and we don't like to take risks, or we do. We all do. It's just, it's the environment we set ourselves up in that allows that to happen. So, for example, in a classroom situation, I've been told, students don't like to share their own opinions.
Yeah.
And yet you get into a group of Aussies or North Americans, students love to share their opinions, but they don't think very much, right? Like, respectfully, it's a huge generalization, but I'm just going, you get the stereotype.
Yeah.
And I am using a prejudice stereotype because a stereotype everyone can understand. And prejudice I use in the pure sense of prejudging to understand the circumstances, right? So we understand what those differences are. And yet, how do I get a group of students that are local, like Singaporean, to become very interactive and engaged? I get them to do group exercises as opposed to individual exercises. And then I get them to become a large group, a medium group, then a small group, and then an individual. I take steps to actually get them to that point. And then guess what? They can chatter just as much as everyone else, but they need to have that level of confidence and understand and feel comfortable in that environment. And when you talk to me about Asians not wanting to take risks or not wanting to chat, just go to a local food court. Oh my gosh, it is so noisy.
Yeah,
and everyone's got an opinion. And you listen to the aunties talking about their kids, and like, it's not that they don't do it. It's just that they do it in different boxes and silos. And in order to do that, and if you want to extract that in a group, you need to be able to figure out how to break it down. And from an individual, we all have pain. We all have joy. And how we frame it and how we manage it is probably the tricky part. And that's where I go back to this experimentation thing. If you're not happy with those types of results, test something out, try something new. So back to your question on how do we deal with it? I think the emotions that we have as people are all the same. However, the models we've learned may be different. And if the model doesn't work for you, now with the internet, take a look at other models and then try some, right?
But how do we make that aspirational, right? I feel like, so a lot of, I work with a lot of big corporate clients. I work with big companies. I work with startups. A lot of what I see is people not speaking up. And usually, as we go deeper into it and we start to sort of explore the reasons why people aren't speaking up, a lot of it is to do with fear of judgment. Something that comes up very commonly is oh, what if I'm wasting other people's time, right, with what I'm saying? So how do we get people from this, I'm just going to hold back because I'm scared I'm going to say something irrelevant or unnecessary, to actually, I have this information, right? And I get what you're saying about that sort of stereotype of, I don't really have anything to say and I haven't done the work, but I'm going to have an opinion anyway. That's not what we're talking about, right? I'm talking about in a corporate setting, in a company where it's someone's genuine job to have this information and they've gone away and they've done the work, but they still won't speak up necessarily, depending on who's in the room. How do we make that culturally aspirational? Because like you're saying, with the internet, you can go look at different ways of doing this, but what is going to make that person even go to ChatGPT and say, hey, my communication style isn't working, or like I'm holding back in meetings. What can I try differently? What is that point? How do we make that transition?
Sure. So, me, famous line, I don't know, but my thoughts are.
But you have a thought.
But I have a thought. So your question is very complex from how I see it. First, it's not about just the individual and what they need to do within themselves to stand up or change or improve. It is about the environment that is created. And if we're talking communication, there's a sender and a receiver, right? So if their superior or their boss or their colleague is in a situation where that may threaten the person or make them feel uncomfortable, why would you do something that's going to make you feel uncomfortable if you know that the potential is going to be negative? So that's why you be quiet, right? That's one thing. So then there's this development of trust. So are you with someone that you trust? There's a whole trust equation about the environments that have been set, the challenges that you've overcome, because you don't just have trust. You don't walk in a room and say, hi, trust me. Because whoever says that, that's the first person you never trust, right? Okay. So it has to be built. So first, is it in a trusting environment? Second, is it you can trust someone, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to support you. So then is there the support there? If there isn't, then again, you need to, why say something when you know that it's going to fall on deaf ears? Okay. And then the third part is if it's trusting and supportive, then you might go, okay, what personally is holding me back on this? Is it my previous experience, right? So for example, we go back to B.F. Skinner's behavior modification process, about if you do something and it's a negative result, you end up doing it less. If you do something as a positive result, then you're going to end up doing it more, right? They call it behavioral design these days, but it's the same idea. So it's punishment and reward sequences to encourage that behavior to happen until it gets to a reaction, right? Or a reactive response or an automated response called a habit, right? So the first part is you need to get all of those dynamics right. And then if you've got, again, the right environment, the trust, the support, and you've figured out what's holding you back, and I can experiment with that and try that out, then you're going to see positive or negative response, and I'm going to keep doing it. Now, I know it's a bit scientific, but guess what? That's my brain. That's how it works, right? So back to Australia, Canada, America, European versus Southeast Asian or Asian overall. If you factor each one of those things into the circumstance, you start being able to take out some parts that you can plug in or plug out more. The trust environment. So in North America, for instance, my limited experience, blah, blah, blah. But you walk in and everybody trusts everybody, right? And then you have some people that go, we're going to start with high levels of trust. And then as things don't support it, we're going to lower it, right? In other environments, you don't have that trust and you're going to climb up. And it's a survival mechanism. So I'm sorry it's a bit complicated, but it's hard. And, I don't have the simple answer, but if you can break it into those different chunks, then you can figure it out. Then you might go, okay, but now why does a European person versus an Asian person behave this particular way. And that might be because of the environments in which we've been raised, which goes back to some of the things that you've been talking about, a number of things you've been talking about in the book. So as you evolved, you had different influences in different environments. So from your family and from being in India, then where your educational background came from, traveling around the world, going to Singapore, Hong Kong. My gosh, you've had all of these different melting pots, or not melting pots, but hemispheres or ecosystems that shaped you in that particular way. And then you appear to me as being quite a cognitive thinker. So then you're probing and asking these questions. So some people don't. Some people don't think a lot, which is great too, right? It's just that they react more and they're more emotionally driven. So all of those things kind of fit into this simple equation.
Yeah.
And some of the thoughts that you've done, which are brilliantly in each one of the chapters, is you're asking people to ask themselves questions. So when I was reading your book last night, and when you gave it to me, a couple months ago, I was going through it. And I said, this is great. The story's nice. And each one's a little kind of, good night story that you can read about. And then the questions that you have to ask yourself. And a lot of people would just skim that over. But if you actually read the chapter, and then I know it's going to sound geeky, but I do this sometimes, is I'll just read out loud the questions. When you read the questions out loud, that forces you to start thinking about them. And then once you think about them, then it moves things forward, right?
Yep.
So back to, why are Europeans this way and Asians that way? And how do they take the risk profile? All of that builds into this component of how you can actually build. If it's important to you to take the risk, then you're going to do it.
Yeah. So how do we make it important to people to take the risk to speak up in an appropriate environment?
Okay. So once you've assessed that environment, which you really need to think about, right? Because if you want to experiment in speaking out and those components of trust or support aren't there, you're not going to get the result that you want, right? So you need to get the timing, the environment right, and then be able to test it out. So how do you do that? That's where you go back to this bugs me so much. I've got to do it. Like, I keep looking. There are so many things in my life where I'm going, where is there a green light so I can figure it out? There's no green light. It's never going to come. You just have to.
But you get what I'm saying, right? Like for me, I mean, obviously my whole world is communication, right? And it consumes me all day, every day. And I think about this stuff all day, every day. And now we have a podcast about it, and I have a book about it. And, I do keynotes and workshops and all the rest of it. But I feel like for the average human being, they're not spending any time thinking about it, right?
Yeah.
So if it's not something that's bugging them and they're happy just going through life, doing their 9-to-5 job, not just kind of living this pattern from day to day where it's bugging me, but it's not bugging them, right? Am I just like, do I just need to get over it and accept that it's not aspirational?
No, you're perfect the way you are. But you are. And the other people are perfect the way they are too. The question will always be, what's driving a person, right?
Okay, so is the question what's driving a person? Or if we were to shift that lens, can we look at what's driving a society or what's driving an organization? Because if I then sort of connect that to innovation, which is your area of expertise, right? If we don't have people that are willing to speak up, we don't have people that are seeing, having a voice and being able to communicate effectively as aspirational, how is that going to impact innovation and in turn hold back companies and organizations and entire societies?
Sure. Well, you really asked the simple questions, right? Okay,
Thanks.
so yeah. So you've heard of Pareto's law, the 80-20 rule, right? And different people take it in different ways. But what I always find fascinating with these things, and this does relate to your question, is Pareto was a statistician, right? So basically statistics, like take a coin, flip it, how many times does it land heads, how many times does it land tails, 50-50 probability, right? That kind of stuff. So he observed, because he was into growing plants. I know some people grow plants, other people drive racing cars, whatever, right? And he found that roughly out of every 10 plants, 2 grew and bore fruit, and the other 8 didn't. Kind of started that way, right? Roughly, I wasn't there. I never met the guy, all of that other stuff. And then Pareto's law, which is really prevalent in numbers of things and statistics. And we can go through all of that, which would be fascinating. But the point is, out of every mass group, there's 20% that makes 80% of the difference. Okay. Now, is that fair? Is that right? Is that just, I don't know. I mean, we talk about being fair. I haven't seen life be that fair.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not saying it shouldn't be, especially if you're in a privileged position and you can influence people. But if you're in a not privileged position and you have no influence, do you want to be that nail that sticks up, that gets hammered down? No, because you need to be able to be smart and survive. Like at the end of the game, I'm really a big supporter, and we're doing things to survive, to stay relevant, I know it's not that sexy, but I think that's where we came from, right? So we need to play our cards the right way. So back to this component of how do we do that? You need to assess it. You need to figure out, how many people am I talking to? Now, when you're talking to people, right, the ones that come and see you aren't, if you went to, let's say, a shopping center and you looked at 100 people going through there, would all those 100 people come to your talk? No, a select few, right? And why? Because what you're talking about, your subject matter, is important to them. So that's the driver, right? So similarly, with what you're going to be talking about now, is what drives those people. Everyone in the masses has their different needs, but their drivers are also very different.
Yep.
So when are they going to step up? They're going to step up when it's important to them. And I hope that important things are important to people.
Yep.
Sometimes I question it. And, I look at what we do with a lot of social media, and, and I don't want to get hammered for it, but I don't see a lot of it as being important.
Yep.
Right? I love cats that juggle, but I can't see why there needs to be so much time taken up in juggling cats. Because a cat juggles, that's cool. Okay, move on. Is there enough food in the world? No. But we're going to, I don't get it, right? And if you look at the types of stuff that we do, it's nice to assume people want to go for the best, but our behavior doesn't show it.
Yep.
Right? And that's not a sad thing. It's who are the people that want to step up and do that and learn and grow and take those steps forward, because that's a driver in them. And I believe if we can help those people first, they will become role models for other people to follow. And as that follows, then we'll create a movement where people will want to grow and develop and work more. And that's why I do the innovation work.
Yep.
The innovation for me is about the creation of new value. So create the creative process, something unique and original and valuable, and then new value as opposed to old value. It's adding value to something. So if you can create and add value to your business, to your personal relationships, to who you are, you're innovating.
Yep.
And you might go, that's not a big deal, or that's nothing new. I go, I know, but we've created the word innovation because somewhere along the line, we've forgotten to do that as people.
Yep.
We've forgotten to constantly want to create new value.
Yep. I love that. I love how you describe what innovation is, right? So creating new value. How important is the communication piece to innovation?
Huge.
So obviously you need to first figure out where the innovation is required, right? Where can new value be added?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Then you've got to communicate that. Then you've got to figure out how to actually add the new value.
Yes.
And then you've got to do the storytelling piece of, we've added this new value by doing X.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And then you've got to convince people to sort of take this on.
Yes.
Can the lack of communication, I know the answer to this. That's a stupid question.
No, There's no stupid question.
The lack of
Yes.
communication to me,
Yeah.
or inappropriate communication
Mm.
or unhealthy communication, will create a barrier in some way, shape, or form to innovation at one of those levels.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Which, in your experience, is the hardest point, or which is the one where communication tends to break down most in the area of innovation?
First point, that innovation process that you were talking about having the idea, communicating it, getting support around that, sounds a lot like entrepreneurship, right? Doing the pitch, telling the story, getting people to buy in. All right. So that's the one observation.
Mhm.
Second part of it is, how does the communication fit into this? Well, if I could draw, which I'm not going to here, but essentially the process of innovation is you're observing all sorts of stuff. So we're observing the room, the conversation, the silence, or the auditory influence, the colors, the textures, the tone, all that stuff is going through. And as we're observing that, we're making decisions on it,
Mhm.
right? And there's no problem or challenge to drive innovation because it's all going smoothly.
Mhm.
But if there was a problem that was going on, then you might go, how do I solve that, right? So for
Mhm.
example, let's say in the room beside us as we're being recorded, there's this thumping that's going on. And you go,
Mhm.
well, how can I do that? Well, there's a couple ways. One would be I could thump on the wall back, right? Another thing is I could go out and yell at the person, or I could go and walk, and so you go through that list of stuff, and then you say, which one am I going to test? I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask someone here in the studio to go out and talk to the other guys and see if they can do that. Test it out. It works, right? That solution may work or may not work. Then you might have to test something else until you can get rid of that thumping, because the thumping is causing a problem with the conversation here. You need to resolve it. Then what the next part of it is, once you've found that solution. So maybe what you do is, oh, if I press this button, it sends an electrical shock over there and they stop. So that was your solution, right? It's a test.
Yep.
Once you test it and it works, then you might go, this is really good. I wonder if someone else has that same problem. And if they do, I wonder if they'd pay for that solution,
Mm.
right? So then you test it out and people love it. And then at each one of these desks, there's this button that buzzes all the other rooms and tells them to be quiet. And all of a sudden you scale it. So it doesn't just work for a couple of people, but a lot of people. And then you scale it around the world, and voila, that is your innovation cycle process, right?
Mm.
So observation, idea generation, identify the problem, test out a whole bunch of stuff, see if it sells. If it sells, make it worldwide. And you can copy anything that's been very successful globally, same model. Okay. So and why I tell you this is because all this complex stuff is not that hard. Each thing within that, guess what? You don't just come from the idea and then figure it out. You got to go through a cycle of experimentation. It works, it doesn't work, it works. And so from the idea generation, from the observation, from the problem, that problem may not be the room next door. It might be the plumbing. Every time someone uses the toilet upstairs, there's something here, like an
somebody's
air
getting an
hammer,
electric
right?
shock
Yeah,
next.
yeah, right. So you don't know. So you gotta test all of this out. And when you test all of this out, what bonds the people behind it? The communication.
Mm-hmm.
Right? This didn't work. This did work. Let's try it. Did we get the result that for each one of those steps, you've got to go through hundreds of those things. That's why innovation is tough, because people just focus on one component of it and they say, voila, we're doing it. No, each step needs all of that work that you did for that one step. And there's probably about 8 or 10 steps you got to do. So organizations go, yeah, well, what's my return on investment on that? I don't know. You don't have the machinery to do all of these things. You want to focus on one zone. That's why it's tough. So what does this have to do with overall communication? Same with people in our lives. There's all these steps that we have to keep going through, where we've got to test them out, see if it works, communicate with the outside environment and in our head, our minds as well, to see if we're getting to that right point. And then if it works, we keep going down it. And from there, what idea might work for me? Does that work for other people? Then do I create a product? Do I scale it? And the machine goes on from there. So to answer your question, how does it work with organizations or individuals? It's that same model. Why it's gotten so popular is because in business, we've stopped doing that,
Yep.
right? We are all about efficiency gains.
Yeah.
And there's only two ways to make a profit that I know of, right? Because I don't know all the answers, right? But there's two ways to make a profit. Either, well, one way to make to sell something is you solve a person's problem or you make them feel good,
Yep.
right? Second part of it is how do you make a profit? You increase your income or you drive down your expenses.
Yep.
And unfortunately, for a lot of our businesses, they are all about driving down expenses. That's why we have all this automation, because it's efficiency gains, right? We're using automation, we're using digitization to reduce the number of errors, to do an efficiency gain. But are we adding value? Don't know. But where the future will be, or however I believe the future will be in adding value all the time. Now, you take that in business, and that's what I teach. Take that personally, and that's what I teach as well. Where are you adding value? And when it comes to communication, how are you communicating to your stakeholders in a personal life, people that you love and care about, to your family, to your friends, to associates in business that you care about, all those things? How are you communicating to them on where we're adding value? Endpoint.
Is it about where you're adding? Actually, I'm going to say this and then I want to tell you something.
Okay.
But is it about communicating to them where you are adding value, or is it about communicating to them where they are adding value to you?
Okay. So what do you think first?
I feel like it has to be a little bit of both, right? I feel like, yeah. And I'm that type of person that just wants people to like feel the value that I add, right? So I do, rather than say that this is the value I add to you.
Yes.
And then I hope that people feel that, right? I think I told you this before. I live my life. My motto is that every person that interacts with me, I want them to walk away feeling like their cup was filled a little bit, even if the conversation we had made them uncomfortable or pushed them to think in a way that was, they weren't ready for or whatever. But I feel like I want them to walk away like I added value to them without me needing to say, hey, I'm going to add value to you today this way, right? But I think also human beings at their very core want to feel seen, heard, and significant. So when I communicate to them the value that they add to me, even though I might be helping them achieve something or do something, I feel like I add value by doing that. So it's now I've gone around in a whole circle. But yeah, that's where we were going with that one.
Yeah.
But I have to tell you one more thing.
Yes.
I was just smiling so much when you were talking about the person in the next room getting that, little electric zap. And then you were talking about, how we can scale that. And then suddenly every room in the world has this. And I just had this mental image of my husband sitting in one room in our house, just looking just a little bit too relaxed. And he always laughs. We have this like inside joke about how the minute he sits down or the minute he like relaxes, I'm like, oh, can you get me my water bottle? Or can you like get the remote? Or can you get the light switch?
Brilliant.
And so now I was just imagining in my head, I'm just pressing this button and he just gets like a little zap every time he looks too relaxed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sure.
So there you go. Now you have your next innovation.
Yes, exactly. Well, look, it could work. Definitely. Definitely.
Let's not do that to him.
Let's not do that.
Before we close, I have two last questions for you.
Okay, sure.
Number one, what has been your absolute biggest communication challenge to date? Could be in Asia, could be not in Asia.
Sure. So in my profession, because I do a lot of facilitation, I do a lot of teaching, communication. You got to get the audience right. You can say you might know what the content is. You might have it in your head. I forget that what's in my head is what in other people's heads, right? So because I'm in my head all day long, right?
Yep.
And it's my world, and why doesn't, why doesn't the world see it my way? And I've got to keep reminding myself, this is your world. This is the real
Yep.
world, right? And you don't get it. You can't see what's over there.
Yep.
And if you really want to help somebody out, you got to go over there and figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I can be loud, I can be quiet, but it doesn't matter. I'm trying to help them out. That's the challenge, right?
Yeah.
So the way I teach in Southeast Asia is different, and the way I communicate is different than the way I teach in, let's say, North America. The content is the same. The delivery and the engagement needs to be different. As you were saying, sometimes people hold back a lot more here. But oh my gosh, when you gain their confidence, and after, let's say, the third day of going through a program, I can't shut them up,
Yeah.
right? They want it, and it doesn't matter what country they're from. They just go, this is kind of our zone, and this is how we can behave. And we know that it's going to be valuable and more valuable to communicate that way. So that's when you get it right. And when you get it wrong, the third day, it's still, you can hear crickets chirping. You're going, what am I getting wrong here? How do I recalibrate? Because guess what? That's life. It happens. Sometimes you don't get it right. So I like to think of things like I have a toolkit, and there's a standby tool that I always go to that works. But guess what? It's not working this time. How do I adjust it? I got to use something else in order to get that result, because it's all about the results.
When was the last time you got it really, really badly wrong?
Every
I feel
day.
like it's been a few years, I'm sure.
No, it will hit you out of left field. I did this one talk, and I cracked a joke, and one of the people in the audience was offended. And when you hear the clang, like you just go, wow.
Yeah.
And you could hear everyone in the room.
Yeah.
It wasn't huge. It was about 30 people, but everyone in the room went, whoa, why is this person reacting this way? It was like, it was quite a demonstrable reaction. And there you are up on the stage, and you know that you've pressed the wrong button.
Yeah.
What do? And I was honest. I said, I am very sorry. And I'm saying this in front of everybody. I really did not mean to offend you in this way. And it was meant in a completely different way. And the way I saw it was this: how about we try and let go of it for now, and let's discuss it when we wrap this up.
Yeah.
And that person was wonderful. They said, okay, I understand. And then we had a really deep conversation a little bit later after the class had wrapped up. And you just go, wow, I haven't experienced that one. But guess what? That's reality, because my headspace and their headspace was very different.
And I think it's so much of communication is about that, right? I use the phrase quite often about meeting people where they are, right? Because it's like you said, it's my headspace is here, and I have all of this knowledge, and I see the world in this way, but I have to recognize that the person that I'm speaking to comes from a completely different context. They don't know the things that I know. They don't see the world the way that I do. They don't experience the world the way that I do, right? And so how do I moderate? Or the M in human is about moderating what you're saying to really hit the right note with the other person.
Yes.
Because it doesn't matter how good your content is. It doesn't matter how great you are at innovation or at teaching innovation. But if the person on the receiving end isn't receiving that information in the way that they need to be able to implement it and really take it on, then it doesn't really matter anymore, does it?
Absolutely. And that's why, just adding a little bit to this, why it's really important when you're conversing. And we have this, in this session, we just gel, right?
Yep.
What if you and I were using completely different talking techniques? You know how it's just awkward, right? So, and it's not that people want to be awkward. They want to find commonality. They just can't. So one of the tools that we use, or even in innovation, when we're talking about an idea, a concept, or when we're talking about an interplay between people is you get a piece of paper, and it could be digital. Digital's just as fine. Well, it's not. Paper's definitely still better, but that's a longer conversation. But you draw a sketch and you go, so I'm talking about this, and this is how it's there. And it's not about how well you draw it. It's about giving that person another mode to be able to pick up that pen, process it, and add to that drawing that you put. So it's kind of, it's the physical, here's the idea, please add to it or subtract to it, or agree I'm on the right track or not on the right track. And it's like a dot that to connect the dots. And that's why I'm always walking around with a notebook and a pen. And when things go a little bit, left at Albuquerque, you kind of go, this is what I'm thinking, and I'm drawing it. And then I give the pen to the other person or the pencil and get them to add to something too. Because then I'm getting that buy-in, that communication that, it's hard. Auditory communication is hard because every word has 100 different meanings to us, right? So that simplification and constant feedback loop forces us to.
I love that. I feel like we're going to have to do another episode on visual communication.
Oh my gosh.
But for now, I'm going to ask you the last question.
Oh, okay, great.
One last question.
All right.
In one sentence.
Sure. Tough one.
What does speaking human mean to you?
So I think it's two things. I think the first part of it is what you've written in your thoughts, which is a brilliant collection of a very personal life that you've gone through, and the key questions you need to ask yourself as you hit those different parts of your life. And when you compile that, those are really good questions for you to reflect upon when life throws you challenges. Okay, so that's one part of what, and it's longer than a sentence, I know.
It's
okay. The other part of speaking human is for a bit like what I was saying earlier. Accept that you see the world in one way and that others see the same world in different ways. And to be able to speak human and get a collaborative result, only if you want a collaborative result, you need to try different things out to find that common space.
Thank you so much for being with me today, Derek. I had an absolutely wonderful time chatting to you as always, and I'm sure so many of our listeners will have got so much value out of today's conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. It was an absolutely brilliant conversation. Loved it, and all the best with it. Make it rock and roll.
Thank you. Thank you all for being with us on the Speaking Human podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Damini Chawla. Keep speaking human. Thank you for joining us on the Speaking Human podcast. I'm Dr. Damini Chawla, your host. The purpose of this podcast is to create a society where honesty, vulnerability, and human connection are culturally aspirational. As such, we've asked every guest on the podcast to choose a charity that they like to support. We've included the details of this charity of their choice in the information for this episode. Please feel free to make a donation if the cause speaks to you. Thank you for joining us once again. Do like, follow, and subscribe.